disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Val, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the April 26th issue of the New York Times Arts and Leisure section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The first article is Energy Flows Without Walls by Laura Capel and Toubab Diallo, Senegal. The main studio of the École des Savoirs, a school near Dakar, Senegal, defies every convention of what a professional dance space should be. It has no sprung floor, no mirrored walls. Actually, there are no walls at all. The dancers work outdoors under a large tented canopy, which provides shade from the sun without enclosing the space. The surrounding trees, housing very vocal birds, are close enough to touch. And the floor is usually treacherous. It's sand. Recalling her first time at the École des Savoirs, Florette Gateka, a dancer from Burundi, said that finding her footing on the uneven, shifting surface was such a struggle. Oh my God. Yet the singular atmosphere soon won her over, Gateka said. She was one of 24 dancers training for a teaching certification at the École des Savoirs in early March. The Sand Studio was part of the nature-oriented vision of Germaine Acogny, 81, the school's commanding founder. One morning, the group joined her in front of the studio to channel the energy from the landscape. Perched on rocks, they took deep breaths. Here, everything is alive, Gateka said. Yet in the background was a less than idyllic hum. Not far along the Atlantic coastline, trucks zoomed back and forth on a construction site, the future home of a deepwater commercial port, overseen by Dubai Port World, which threatens the cultural ecosystem around the school. Acogny, often called the mother of African contemporary dance, founded the École des Savoirs in 1998 in the fishing village of Toubab Diallo, about an hour's drive from Dakar. Over the years, it has established itself as the highest profile dance training hub in Africa. While it has no permanently enrolled students, it holds regular intensive courses. In addition to learning Acogny's contemporary technique, which incorporates elements from a range of West African dances, dancers can study traditional styles or Black modern dance like the Catherine Dunham and Mfondale techniques. In recent years, the school's achievements have reached the international stage, notably with the first African production of Pina Bausch's The Rite of Spring from 1975, which toured globally from 2021 to 2025, including a stop at the Park Avenue Armory in New York. The school is also a vital platform for choreographers across the region. Later this month, it will host the African Dance Biennial, bringing 25 companies to Toubab Diallo. At first, the goal of the school was to fill a gap, Acogny said in an interview at her home, a short walk from the Sand Studio. While African dance artists have become increasingly visible in contemporary dance internationally, there are very few high-level training programs or facilities on the continent, forcing many to travel to Europe or North America to hone their skills. We wanted to show that dance training in Africa can also reach excellence, Acogny said, and I think we've managed that. Yet the École de Sable has long struggled for stability. In the absence of steady state funding, money is a persistent concern, and the construction of the port has brought new challenges. The school is set to lose surrounding land to expropriation, land that it had acquired to protect its natural ecosystem. Together with other at-risk local arts institutions, it has tried to fight back. After the dancers took in their peaceful surroundings that March morning, Akagni directed them to turn toward the construction site and, putting her palms forward, told them, "Send your energy to stop the port." Before the École de Sable, Akagni had long sought a dance space to call home. After spending her early years between France and Senegal, where her father was a high-ranking civil servant, she opened her first studio in Dakar at just 24. Then, in 1977, Leopold Sédar Senghor, the first president of Senegal, picked her to lead a pioneering program, Mudra Afrique, a satellite of Mudra, the Brussels School of the ballet choreographer Maurice Behart, then popular. As a young woman at the helm, Akagni didn't have an easy time. "I was also divorced and a mother of two, and dance wasn't seen as a proper job," she said. Mudra Afrique was conceived as a Pan-African project, with a number of countries expected to contribute financial support. But only one, the Republic of Congo, ever did, Akagni said. The school folded in 1982, when Senghor's successor withdrew state support. Akagni's life partner, Helmut Vogt, met her shortly before Mudra's end. She had everything, and then all of a sudden she had nothing, Vogt said. An amateur dancer from Germany, Vogt had had a peripatetic career path before opening a studio in Frankfurt with a friend. For Akagni, he started to act as an agent, booking her gigs around Europe, then helping her found the École de Sable. Early on, I asked myself, am I ready to dedicate myself to serving Germaine and her mission? He said, my answer to myself was yes. Success came slowly. In the late 1980s and early 90s, the couple invested in several short-lived ventures, including Dance Intensive in a remote village in southern Senegal, where Akagni had connected with a healer. We had to bring 50 mattresses over from Dakar, Vogt said, but political unrest in the region made it impossible to continue. Touabab Diallo came to the rescue. This fishing village was already an unlikely haven for artists. In the 1970s, the Haitian artist Gerard Chenet, a political exile, had settled in the area and built an art center. Well, that's not work. Sobo Bade, which was a theater and space for artist residencies and a hotel and restaurant. Step by step, my father brought a lot of international artists, said Ibrahim Jacques Chenet, Chenet's son. Some opened other art spaces, earning Touabab Diallo a reputation as a cultural village, he said. After holding some intensives at Sobo Bade, Akagni and Vogt looked for a space of their own. Akagni sold a small apartment she owned in Paris, and Vogt added his savings to secure the grounds of the École de Sable and built the Sand Studio. Yet developing the schools further and making it financially viable proved daunting. We could hold workshops with dancers from 25 African countries, Vogt said, but we had to find ways to cover the costs because African dancers often don't have the money to pay for training. In the absence of funding from Senegal's cultural ministry, Help has mostly come from European and American foundations, as well as the European Union. The luxury brand Chanel has been a partner for the past 2 years. Over the years, the school was able to build bungalows to house students and artists on site, as well as a second studio. But the lack of resources directed to culture in Africa is an issue for artists, Akagni said. Last week, the budget for the African Dance Biennial, set to open on Wednesday, was still around $47,000 short, Vogt said. You have to be strong to avoid a situation where Europeans impose what they want. The school has been forced to hold its ground against the new port in Nayade, just south of Toubab Diallo, a $1.2 billion project designed to relieve congestion at the port of Dakar. Nearly 450 acres have been designated for expropriation, affecting a number of local arts institutions. They have set up an association to defend themselves and warn of the environmental threat. There has been no consultation with locals, Jeanette said, or attempts to preserve the artistic ecosystem. In an email statement, a spokesman for Dubai Port World said that a public consultation process had been conducted by the Senegalese government and that affected community members had access to a grievance mechanism and compensation. I don't feel like we're being heard, Akagni, who used to walk to the Laguna every morning. Yet she refuses to let the port take any energy out of her, she added. I believe everyone has their place in life, and mine is here. While Akagni still choreographs, most recently a tribute to Josephine Baker, Josephine, her work as a dancer and teacher has often overshadowed her stage creations. The success of the École de Sable, especially, has brought her international recognition late in life, with distinctions including the Golden Lion at the 2021 Venice Dance Biennial. I stayed calm and carried on, she said. I'd rather be recognized in the fall of my life than at the beginning, because perhaps I would have been forgotten by now. At the École de Sable, she no longer leads as many training sessions as she used to, but the next generation is ready to take over. In a class in March, Kodro Evry Asu Detman, a dancer and choreographer from the Ivory Coast, taught the Akagni technique as its founder sat ramrod straight behind her, occasionally getting up to correct steps or reaffirm their intention. Asu Detman said Maman Germain, as many call her, had a profound effect on her life when she first came to the École de Sable in 2010. As an African woman, there is still a lot of pressure from your family to marry, she said. I didn't feel like I always had a choice. The École de Sable gave me the confidence to find a way. She described the Akagni technique and its connection to nature as a religion. Many of its steps bear the names of animals or plants. The plexus is the sun, the spine the tree of life. When I was a little girl, Akagni said, people thought I was crazy because I imagined the trees dancing. All classes are conducted to the invigorating sound of live sabargan drums, and pleasure, too, is important. Listen to your body. Don't frustrate it, Asu Detman told a group of dancers. They attempted a modified version of the balletic grand plie, undulating their spines while balancing close to the ground. Do you feel that slight wind on your skin? At the end of class, Asu Detman gestured respectfully to Akagni. Thank you to Maman. I hope you are happy, Akagni told the group. Either way, I call the shots. As they laughed and clapped, she added, her voice turning softer, but I think you're happy. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times Arts and Leisure section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The next article by Hugh Morris is called A Legacy Built on Mystery and Tearful Melancholy. John Dowland died in 1626, but he's still influential. Composers have long used musical emblems that both guide and confuse listeners. For Dmitri Shostakovich, it was a phrase that played on the letters of his name with irony, pain, and distance. For Hector Berlioz, a theme could at once be a cryptogram, a narrative device, and a representation of artistic passion and madness. And for the English lutenist and composer John Dowland, who died 400 years ago, it was the tear motif, a melancholic signifier wrapped in layers of mystery. Dowland had created a pavan, a type of stately dance from Elizabethan times, titled Lachrymé Pavan. It began as a wordless lute song. In his second book of songs and airs from 1600, the tune gained lyrics, and Flow My Tears eventually became the most famous song of his era. The song begins with Dowland's musical emblem, beginning with a drooping downward scale in a minor mode. The line briefly jumps back up where it's suspended for a moment. Then the harmonic underlay shifts, creating a yearning suspension, and the melody sighs downward again. Peter Holman, a conductor and musicologist, wrote in a book on Dowland's 1604 collection, also titled Lachrymé, that these pavans are perhaps the greatest but most enigmatic publication of instrumental music from before the 18th century. They're enigmatic for many reasons, not least because of the contradiction between the musical expression and Dowland's personal circumstances. Dowland was well regarded. The poet Richard Barnfeld wrote that his heavenly touch upon the lute doth ravage human sense. Dowland was also well connected, cosmopolitan, and at times unusually well remunerated for his work. Yet his musical expression was dominated by melancholy. With that imbalance comes the sense that Dowland had an acute understanding of his place in the musical market of the time. K. Dawn Grapes, the author of a recent biography of Dowland, said in an interview that Lachrymé seems to have been the greatest hit of the late 16th century. She added he was savvy enough to understand that if Lachrymé was the piece of music that was being embraced, that maybe he was going to embrace that personality himself. The collection's 7 pavans are all called Lachrymé, Latin for tears, and all begin with the same tear motif. Like a canny filmmaker spinning out sequels today, he wrote pieces including Old Tears, Sad Tears, A Lover's Tears, and finally, True Tears. You get the feeling that he knew exactly what he was doing in committing so thoroughly to one mood. In the same Lachrymé collection, along with music dedicated to patrons and important contacts, he included a pavan titled Semper Dowland, Semper Dolens, or Always Dowland, Always Doleful. There is an element of modern performativity in Dowland's artistry, but more direct routes to performing his music are valid as well. The soprano Ruby Hughes, a regular interpreter of his work, said, "There's a sort of melancholic domain that Dowland inhabits, which I find authentic and deeply felt, in the same way I feel with Schubert and Schumann." In a recent album, Amidst the Shades, the words fear, grief, and pain in Flow My Tears have as much individual coloring as any section from Winter Ice or Dichter Liebe. By taking Dowland's Melancholia at face values, artists can also treat it as a path to deeper emotions. The countertenor Iaston Davies said that he sees this emotional atmosphere as something closer to Sigmund Freud's understanding of the phenomenon related to unconscious mourning. When faced with grief you can't express, you use poetry or music to get through your melancholy, Davis said. His 2014 album of Dowland songs is narratively structured, positioning melancholy like a stage of grief to pass through. For Davies, a highlight of Dowland's work is the song In Darkness Let Me Dwell, an example, he said, of how music can transcend the time it's in. It's oddly structured, but deliberately so. The lute accompaniment ends a few measures before the singer, who is left vulnerably exposed for the line, "Oh, let me living die till death do come." It sets the text so well, meaning doesn't really matter when it's from, Davies said. It is one of the greatest songs in the English language. Nothing is known about Dowland's early life. There are no extant records, at least none that anybody has found yet, that tell where he was born, who his parents were, or how he got his training, Grapes said. Scholars agree he was born around 1563, probably in Westminster, England. But it's a mystery how he got his start in music or how he looked. Dowland's relationship with institutions, however, show an ambitious man keen to improve his standing in life. He received a Bachelor of Music degree from the University of Oxford in 1588, the same year as the madrigal king Thomas Morley. At a time when social class was extremely stratified, Dowland proudly repeated his learned title across his published works. He secured numerous important jobs in royal courts and became unusually well-traveled musician for his time. In the 1590s alone, he moved to France, toured the courts of present-day Italy, was employed by the Landgrave of Hesse in Germany, and then by Christian IV of Denmark. He was among the most highly paid court musicians of his day. What made Dowland's cosmopolitanism more remarkable, Grapes said, was that Dowland always had to ask permission to seek other employment. He must have been a great observer, she added, and had some canny insight into the workings of the political situation of his day. The most important document in understanding Dowland's life is a letter written to Queen Elizabeth I's Privy Councillor, Sir Robert Cecil, in 1595. Alongside its description of Dowland's life, it also shows him at his most anxious. He believed that he had missed out on the vacant, coveted, lieutenant's position in the Queen's Protestant court because she thought him an obstinate papist. His fears were exaggerated. Elizabeth engaged Catholic musicians such as William Byrd, but his dream position eluded him. Despite that setback, Dowland became one of the most widely published musicians of his era. His first of 3 songbooks was reprinted 4 times, making it the most popular English songbook of the time. In 1612, a few years after retiring to England from Denmark, he finally gained a position in the English court, which coincided with the last of his published musical volumes, A Pilgrim's Solace. Its final number is titled A Galliard to Lacrimae. Today, Dowland is an important figure in Britain's national music story, but he has gone through many transformations since his death. For a short time at the end of the 19th century, Dowland was taken up by Britain's choral societies, his delicate four-part textures awkwardly arranged for massive civic choirs. But it was during the 20th century that his revival truly began. Elizabethan revivalism took hold of the British society after World War I. The first wave was with the Bloomsbury Group, exemplified by texts like Virginia Woolf's Orlando, and it took on a different character through the late 1930s and 40s. The Lion Has Wings, a wartime propaganda film that drew on the Elizabethan historical drama Fire Over England, starring Laurence Olivier and Vivien Leigh, drew parallels between England's victory over the Spanish Armada and the war against Nazi Germany. Imani Mosley, a musicologist at the University of Florida, said that Dowland, in his period, became a very easy shortcut for directors like Alexander Korda and others to signify not only are we the Elizabethan period, but that England is the great. Dowland, she said, became a signifier of England's might. For the next generation, living through the reign of Elizabeth II, Dowland was an important touchstone. Performers like Anthony Rulli, Emma Kirkby, Alfred Deller, and Julian Bream committed to creating complete recordings of his work, spurred by the budding, historically informed performance movement. Though perhaps more associated with Henry Purcell, Benjamin Britten also projected his strong connection to Dowland. I feel as close to Dowland, Britten told Donald Mitchell in 1968, as I do my youngest contemporary. He foregrounded that relationship in Lachrymé in 1950, Nocturnal After Dowland in 1963, and in his 1953 opera Gloriana, a continuation of the Elizabethan survivalism that featured two Dowland-esque lute songs sung by the Earl of Essex. Britten saw in both Purcell and Dowland a kind of modernity for their time that resonates with him, Mosley said, and so he wanted to amplify their compositional modernity with the way he saw himself. A long line of British composers have since responded to Dowland, including Peter Maxwell Davies, Sally Beamish, and Thomas Adès. But Dowland's music also has had impact outside classical music. The music producer Danny L. Harley, who has worked on recent albums by Dua Lipa, also feels a connection to Dowland. I'm not entirely sure what drew me to Elizabethan music, Harley said in an email, but I feel like it's strangely connected with my love of European dance pop, something to do with hitting the perfect turn of melancholy phrase with the perfect arpeggio. Dowland is at his best, Harley said, in pieces like Go Crystal Tears, where there's a voice sitting in the abyss accompanied by a lute playing one note at a time. Dowland's commitment to a melancholy aesthetic may have also helped him achieve a special level of musical focus. As much as it was an understood practice for composers to repeat and repurpose the same melodies, Dowland's way of doing it has such an aura, Harley said, like he was orbiting this vivid musical goal that was gradually being realized over his compositional career. Ashley Spencer has written an article on television called At Baywatch, Open Auditions, Aspiring Mimosas, and Andersons. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times Arts and Leisure section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Now to the article. On a brisk February Wednesday, a tidal wave of rippling abs and red swimsuits swept into Marina del Rey, California, just down the shore from Venice Beach in Los Angeles. About 2,000 buffed, waxed, and otherwise hopeful people had come to the Marriott Hotel that day for open auditions to a new Baywatch revival on Fox, premiering sometime in the 2026-2027 season. Aspirants varied by age, physique, background, and ability. Most were united in a dream of becoming the next Pamela Anderson or Jason Momoa. The open format meant that theoretically anyone, even those without agents or acting experience, could be considered for roles big and small. Those present had been whittled down from about 14,000 who applied online, a Fox spokesman said. Tori Tarr, 20, who works at a Longhorn Steakhouse in Kansas City, Missouri, was among those who braved the chilly morning, long waits, and eclectic competition. When she heard about the opportunity, she booked flights, touched up her blonde highlights, and bought 3 red swimsuits. She described herself as a newer face in the acting world and hoped her 7 years of competitive swimming would give her an advantage. I made it all the way up to U.S. sectionals, she added proudly. The original Baywatch, which premiered on NBC in 1989 and ran mostly in syndication until 2001, starred David Hasselhoff as the head of a group of Los Angeles County lifeguards. It made international stars of Anderson, Carmen Electra, and others. Momoa was discovered after the show left Los Angeles in 1999 to become Baywatch Hawaii. A fever dream of glistening abs and emotional rescues, Baywatch became the most watched show in history according to Guinness World Records, at its peak clocking an estimated 1.1 billion viewers each week globally. The new version, which producers said was technically season 12 of the original, stars Stephen Amell as the son of Hasselhoff's character. It's not a commentary on the original, but we're doing kind of a contemporary version, said the showrunner, Matt Nix, who promised faster pacing and bigger action aligned with modern expectations. At the same time, are you going to do Baywatch without the red swimsuit? Obviously not, Nix added. Will there be slow motion running on the beach? Of course there's going to be slow motion running on the beach. The morning started on Marina Beach, a man-made cove across the street from the Marriott, where social media stars, students, athletes, pageant queens, and actors waited to be called inside for auditions. Chase Roback, 28, a veteran of Chippendales and Magic Mike shows in Las Vegas, said he wanted a role because it would make my mom really happy. Standing on the sand, hairless pecs reflecting the sun, he added, "She told me if I don't get it, don't come home." For the Australian-born Margaret Dupree, 77, the stakes seemed lower. Clad in a pink cowboy hat, spiky corset, and fur-trimmed platform boots, she said she had worked in the original as a stand-in for Anderson in scenes when Anderson didn't want to get her hair wet. A spokesman for Fox could not confirm Dupree's role. She wanted a part that would allow her to swim for the cameras again. "I'm quite a dolphin," she said. In the beachside parking lot, Jack Francis, 39, nibbled on pistachios while awaiting her turn. Unlike most of the other women who came in full glam, Francis, a former stripper who described herself as a physical comedian, had painted her face like a circus clown, part of a performance art piece. I like the way I get to interact with people as a clown more than as a woman, she said. It attracts much better energy. As for a role in Baywatch, she added dryly, I think a clown doing beach cleanup would be great for the subtext. Maciel Taveras, 41, a Los Angeles transplant who represented the Dominican Republic in the 2007 Miss Universe pageant, threw off her fur coat to pose in front of a Baywatch branded truck in the parking lot. Then she did one last slow motion run. For 20 years, I've been praying to be on this show, she said, adding, everybody and their grandmother wants to be in the show, honestly. The day wore on. Auditioners waited in the parking lot for their numbers to be called, then were herded in groups to the hotel. Inside, it was festive chaos. Guests exited the elevators to find scantily clad hopefuls doing push-up contests and splits in the lobby. Flight attendants with roller bags dodged a woman in roller skates. As auditions wore down, Lindsay Pelas, 34, a glamour model originally from rural Louisiana, lounged in a trench coat, swimsuit, and stilettos as she scrolled her phone. The Baywatch franchise, she said, aligns with my personal brand. She has more than 8 million Instagram followers. Growing up, I loved the WWE divas or the NFL cheerleaders or the Playboy playmates, she said. That's what I thought power and beauty and fun was when I was a little girl. Not everyone on the beach is a model, and the same holds true on Baywatch. Tony Moore, 43, an actor and broadcast host, said he had shown up in a cozy maroon tracksuit with an eye on being cast as an office worker. His look was less beach body, he said, than Cabin in Big Bear, a reference to the California resort area. Someone has to post. Waves are too high. Stay home, he said. That would be me. Laura Reisman has written an article titled, Sculptor Taps the Natural World for a Towering New Bronze Age. Turin, Italy. At a warehouse complex here, the artist Giuseppe Pannone swung open a steel door and revealed a world of his making. Life-size sculptures of trees standing like a peculiar forest of metal. Slabs of bark carpeted the floor, and a bough of bronze was aflame as it was being soldered to a trunk, all in preparation for the artist's sprawling new show at the Gagosian Gallery in New York. A tree is, by its very nature, an extraordinary sculpture, Pannone said, walking among his works. Every branch swings forth according to its drive to survive. So the tree's form is a record of its life story. As artistic subjects, trees also require giant spaces, and Pannone has brought up a number of warehouses around his Turin studio where he sculpts and stores them, maintaining his creations on view as if they were in a private museum. Since the 1960s, Pannone has been a leading figure in the Art Povera movement, whose avant-garde proponents created spare, metaphorical works using humble or organic materials. Today at 79, he is working with ever-mounting intensity amid a surge of exhibitions in recent years, as he acknowledged with a wide smile, his thick shock of silver hair fluttering as he laughed. With a woodman's robust health, he installed his mammoth works alongside a young team at Gagosian. Pannone's work originated in the forests of his native Piedmont region in northern Italy, where he treated nature as a collaborator. For one of his earliest works, he gripped a tree and left a model of his hand in place, photographing the trunk as it gradually enveloped his fist, casting the form in bronze. In his early 20s, Pannoni and other artists of the 1960s were rejecting conventions about working in traditional studio spaces. The woods became his studio, and the trees his interactive subjects. His work revealed the symbiosis between them and humans, and even posited their equivalence. I wanted to place my body in dialogue with the natural world, linking my life with the life of a tree, living, like me, just at a very different rhythm, Pannoni, his fingers pirouetting across the smooth brown surface of one of his signature debarked trees in the warehouse. In his initial years, he whittled down square wood beams to lay bare the sapling within, following the hairline contour of a growth ring to reveal the forest inside the timber. His father traded produce among farmers in the Maritime Alps, and Pannoni would accompany him, entranced by the primitive ancestral dimension there, the way nature dominated every aspect of the culture, he said. This was the view of reality that shaped my creations. Today he has his own tract of forest where the occasional fallen chestnut tree or larch may become an artwork. Pannoni married Dina Carrera more than 50 years ago, and she has remained a living, lifelong force in his studio. Their son joined them as head of archives, and their daughter became a plant biologist. The whole family shaped by Pannoni's arboreal sensibility. When the critic Germano Salant baptized the Art Provera movement in 1967, Italy was transitioning to a consumer society, and artists were rejecting the market logic imposed by their work by using overlooked materials and focusing on organic reactions, physical transformation, and time, like Janis Cornelis' live flame works and Mario Mertz's igloos with broken glass or sand. Pannoni's toolkit included wood, bark, leaves, and stone, but also his breath, as well as impressions made from his skin. Bronze, a more canonical material, has also remained constant in his output. Bronze is a perennial medium, he points out, central to sculpture since antiquity. In Pannoni's hands, bronze makes a monument of what otherwise would be ephemeral, a tree's younger self, excavated when he strips away its outer layers, is frozen by metal. The title and theme of the Gagosian show, The Reflection of Bronze, is drawn from an included work. Bronze had fallen out of favor when Pannoni began using it. It was too establishment, too bourgeois for the 1960s, but the artist reclaimed the material for the longevity it represents. To him, it corresponds to the idea of stopping time, creating a work in the present that will, in some way, connect with the future, he said. Why do we make art, Pannoni said? Because of a desire to outlast our destiny, to overcome death through the survival of our work. He gave his breaching smile. The urge to create is the urge to immortalize your own existence. The small Tuscan town of Pietrasanta is a stronghold of artisan sculpture production, where Pannoni visits the Del Chiaro Bronze Foundry at least a dozen times a year to inspect the progress of his works there. On a sunny late winter day at Del Chiaro, copies of classic sculptures stood in the parking lot. The ancient Greek Rias bronze, a full-size reproduction of the David, while Pannoni's sculptures lay on crates in the sun and crowd a workshop inside. Amid stacks of plaster molds were big trees in bronze, each carved to reveal saplings they had once been. 4 iterations of Pannoni's Clepsydra, or water clock, headed to the Gagosian exhibition, the tree in its different ages rendering time a visible phenomenon. Branch by branch, Pannoni's trees are formed in molten bronze, using the technique of lost wax casting, a 6,000-year-old process in which a wax model is encased in a mold and melted out, with liquid metal poured into the cavities left behind. Following diagrammed maps of the trees, Del Chiaro's artisans soldered each stem in place, using natural patinas to render the bronze more wood-like. The sculptures were then packed in 4 shipping containers for the 1-month oceanic journey from Italy to New York, paid for by the Gagosians. The exhibit is on view through July 2nd. Del Chiaro cast works by other artists, among them Maurizio Catalan, Fernando Botero, Igor Midraj, and has collaborated for more than 2 decades with Pannoni, whose monolithic and multi-ton sculptures can rise several stories. Maestro Pannoni always gives us work that's quite a challenge to make, said the owner, Franco Del Chiaro, but it's satisfying because he shows up with his dreams and we turn them into reality. That bronze defines the Gagosian show, is part of the choice of its curator, Adam D. Weinberg, the former longtime director of the Whitney Museum. At the American Academy in Rome, where he is a board member, Weinberg took a seat in the courtyard by a wall of Roman antiquities. Bronze has always been an essential medium for art because it possesses such sensitivity for texture and materiality that it's as if it captures the very skin of life, he said. It's a time machine. It fixes moment forever in space. We're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times Arts and Leisure section of the Niagara Frontier Reading Service. Sculptures like Pannoni's husked trees or casts of a tree grown around the artist's hand unite ephemerality and eternality, Weinberg said, explaining that what Pannoni depicts is a life in process. The show at the Gagosian presents a sweeping reimagination of the gallery, turning it into a completely different environment and experience, like a walk in the woods, as Weinberg described. Almost 700 sheets of cork clad an entire gallery hall, like organic shingles, hushing the space so that it feels like being in a forest in the middle of Chelsea, he said. At the center of the room stands Marsia, a skinned tree trunk strung up on its bark. In Greek myth, the satyr Marsyas challenges the god Apollo to a musical contest and loses. As punishment, he is bound to a tree and flayed alive, a brutal symbol of transformation and the ancient Greek preoccupation with metamorphosis as a means to transcend death. In Pannoni's visual retelling, the tree's decorticated wood looks as veiny and as pitiable as human flesh. Riflessio di Bronzo, Reflections of Bronze, the namesake work, closes the show. A mirror made of polished bronze, mimicking mirrors of antiquity, has been waxed and cast multiple times to produce an even rougher version. A Dorian gray deterioration has overtaken the mirror, documenting process and transformation, Pannoni said. His sculpture retrospectives have always been staged at major institutions with expansive gardens or vast halls like Versailles, the Rijksmuseum, and the Centre Pompidou. This show brings new and historical grand-scale works to a cavernous three-hall gallery housed in a one-time Chelsea truck warehouse with a show like a museum experience, Weinberg said. Weinberg, a self-declared partisan for public museums, was drawn to the chance at Gagosian to connect people with Pannoni's work, which is sought after by major collectors like Francois-Emile Pinault and the Glenstone Foundation, as well as prominent museums, though he is better known in Europe than in America. All of the works on view at the Gagosian are for sale, priced from $800,000 to more than $2 million. The opportunity to transport his immense trees across the Atlantic is something museums can rarely support now, and galleries are taking their place, Pannoni said, as he toured another of his private Turin warehouses arranged with art. A colossal, hollowed-out tree lay in halves, stretching horizontally across the former industrial space. He ran a hand along the live trunk, where he had whittled away layers of wood, the younger tree inside now forever exposed. The role of art as a container for thought, he said, and the ambition of an artist to give it permanence to thought, to leave a trace. Pannoni repeated the invocation skyward. To leave a trace, he said. To leave a trace. Emma Dibben has written an article about podcasts. Enjoy classical music just a little bit more. Classical music is often perceived unfairly as elitist, and this stuffy reputation is taking a toll. These 6 podcasts aim to take the mystery out of the genre and put the entertainment factor back in, blending lively conversations and personal storytelling with expert analysis, history, and selections from the music shelf. Sticky Notes, the classical musical podcast. The long-running series bills itself as a classical music podcast for everyone, approaching the genre as a source of joy and entertainment rather than a worthy cultural chore. The host, Joshua Wielerstein, is the chief conductor of the Aalborg Symphony Orchestra in Denmark and the music director of the Orchestre National de Lille in France, and his infectious enthusiasm permeates the show as he focuses on a composer, piece, or musical movement in each episode. There's plenty for experts to enjoy too, including detailed structural analyses of specific symphonies and the historical context behind them, and insightful interviews with fellow conductors, composers, and musicians. Starter episode is Handel's Messiah with Aram Demirjan. The second podcast is Art of the Score. Many people are exposed to symphonic music through movie scores, and they can be a gateway to further exploration. Over 36 episodes, this Australian podcast delves into the scores for some of the most acclaimed films and successful blockbusters, including Jurassic Park, Vertigo, and multiple Star Wars installments. It's hosted by 3 experts: Andrew Pogson, a producer, director, and jazz musician; Nicholas Book, a composer and conductor; and Dan Golding, a composer and academic. The men deconstruct the themes, orchestrations, and narrative context of each score in fascinating detail. Some episodes widen the exposure to explore TV shows, Stranger Things, video games such as Journey, and even the overlooked but surprisingly nuanced stories behind Hollywood's studio fanfares, the familiar blasts that play over the logos for 20th Century Fox, Universal Pictures, and others at the beginnings of movies. Starter episode is episode 25, Blade Runner. The third podcast is Joanna Lumley and the Maestro. British actress Joanna Lumley, best known for co-starring in the long-running comedy Absolutely Fabulous, has been married to conductor and composer Stephen Barlow since 1986. In this charming and insightful series, the couple share relaxed conversations about their love of classical music, often joined by famous guests including Stephen Fry, Carey Mulligan, and Bradley Cooper. Lumley takes the role of the enthusiastic amateur, often posing questions to Barlow about specific composers, pieces, or head-scratching quandaries, like what musical note you could not live without. The starter episode is Rule Breakers, Gesualdo, Beethoven, and Stravinsky. Decomposed with Jade Simmons is the fourth podcast. Despite running for a single season in 2019, Decomposed's 6 episodes is worth seeking out. This American public media show is hosted and co-written by Jade Simmons, a concert pianist and storyteller who brings both talents to bear in these expertly crafted stories about music history. Each episode tells a different story about the human drama behind major works of classical music, interwoven with excerpts from the piece in question. Towering figures like Tchaikovsky, Strauss, and Beethoven take on new life when they're filtered through the show's intimate and searching lens. The starter episode is There's Only One Beethoven. Number 5 is Classical Fix. Although it's billed as a podcast for classical newbies, this BBC show is also ideal for anybody who's nostalgic for the era of making mixed tapes. Before each episode, guests are given a playlist of classical music curated by the host, and on the show they discuss their reactions. The original host of Classical Fix was Clemency Burton Hill, a broadcast and violinist who stepped back in 2020 after a serious brain injury and was replaced by the musician Linton Steffens. Burton Hill returned the next year for a compelling special episode in which she talked about how classical music aided her recovery. Starter episode, Ania Magliano. And number 6 is From the Top. The beloved NPR series From the Top has been running in some form since 2000. 5 years after the nonprofit organization of the same name began with the mission of elevating young musicians. The radio series turned podcast has been hosted by the pianist Peter Dugan since 2020 and tells stories of emerging musicians through a combination of interviews and music from live performance. Starter episode is Playing with Emotion. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the April 26th issue of the New York Times Arts and Leisure section. We read from the New York Times Arts and Leisure section every Sunday at 3 p.m. Your reader has been Val. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have the re-airing of this morning's Buffalo News. Following that at 6 p.m. is the Buffalo News Viewpoints. Stay tuned for this reading and more throughout the day. following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability,